Up next, we have our final presentation of the training. It's going to be presented by Jeremy Smith, who is a staff air pollution specialist in CARB's Advanced Monitoring Techniques section, and he's going to be speaking about California community air monitoring.
Thanks. All right. Oh, thanks. Thanks, Mike. No pressure. Okay. Yeah, thanks, Mike, for that introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Jeremy. I work in the monitoring lab division at CARB. I think this is a good place to stand with the two things. So, and thank you all for staying around till the noon hour on the third day of a conference. I know that I'm hungry and lunch is coming, so I thank you for your attention. So today I'm going to talk about community air monitoring in California, and community air monitoring has been a buzzword for quite a while. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what's gone on in the last 2 years with community air monitoring, what kind of tools and technologies are being discussed by districts to implement community air monitoring, and then get into a little bit about what some of the items that CARB has been doing. So to start, we have to kind of start with the regional air monitoring network that's been around for a long time. And the purpose for this is really looking at attainment with the air quality standards, just as a broad item. And community air monitoring is a little different. We're not really looking at basin-wide ambient air quality standards. It's more, what is the pollutant concentration within individual communities? And so that sounds great. What does that mean in terms of some of the more details in that? So regional air monitoring is more regional measurements. You're looking at basin-wide concentrations. Whereas community air monitoring, it's more localized, so within cities, within neighborhoods, even street by street in some cases. I just gotta look down here. Regional air monitoring focuses primarily on criteria air pollutants. That's one of the big items that everyone's really looking at, and looking at long-term air quality trends. And community air monitoring, most of the purpose is estimating local exposure. So inside communities over shorter term periods, 3 to 5 year type deployments. Due to the basin-wide comparison goals for regional air monitoring, the monitoring needs to be uniform in structure, so you can make those comparisons over time and also to other sites. But in communities, it's not really ever going to happen because no community is the same as another. All the monitoring will be community specific, and that makes things a little more challenging, as those of you that are working on this are aware. Tailoring a monitoring plan to a community can be difficult. And going with the uniform monitoring structure, the measurements tend to be regulatory prescribed instruments or methodologies. These are all things that a lot of you, if not all of us, are well aware of. But in community monitoring, this may include some non-regulatory instrumentations or methods based on whatever the community-specific goals and objectives for monitoring are. And this can include low-cost sensors, and that's been a topic of many presentations over the last 3 days. And so kind of the big question with community air monitoring is how do we leverage new technologies to look at community-level concentrations of criteria and air toxics? And I chose toxics and criteria pollutant phrase here because kind of the big driver is Assembly Bill 617 or AB 617 here that mentioned. And in one sentence, what 617 has done is created a focus on community level monitoring and pollutant concentrations. It's much more complicated than that, but that's kind of the general gist of what's going on. And at CARB, what this has done, it created the Community Air Protection Program, or the Office of Community Air Protection, or OCAP, those of you that are in there. And these bullet items here are some of the big things that are being used to implement AB 617. And the biggest one is partnerships with communities, is engaging with the community and going to the communities to conduct monitoring. But there's also lots of big items here. All of these are big items. Statewide strategies to reduce emissions within communities, metrics to track and report progress. And also a very big one with this is improved data accessibility. How do you make this information available to people other than those of us in this room? So to communities, to the public in a meaningful way. And so today, I'm going to talk about the expanded air monitoring, so taking monitoring down to the community level. And I'll preach to the choir of the 617 folks in the room. This is a very fast program. The bill was signed into law in July 2017. And a little over a year later, the CARB board selected 10 communities across the state and adopted CARB's Community Air Protection Blueprint. And so this represents a lot of work from a lot of people for a long period of time. And so once the communities were selected, going forward to today, I guess kind of the biggest thing coming is July 1st, statute requires the beginning of community air monitoring within the selected communities. So it's only a few weeks away, so things are just getting started. And then the other big key deadline coming up is in October. The community emissions reduction programs or efforts to help reduce emissions in these communities is due. So that's a lot of people doing a lot of work for that. But today we'll be focused more on the monitoring side of things. And if you'd like to look at the Community Air Protection Blueprint, it outlines CARB strategies to implement AB 617. That's all available online. So you can look at this website, or you can just Google that. Get there pretty quick. So what were the first-year communities selected? There were 10 overall selected. 7 were selected for a community emission reduction program right off the bat. And they were selected based on available monitoring information and data about those communities. And all the communities except for West Oakland include a monitoring component. So kind of going down California, South Sacramento-Florin in the Sacramento district, Richmond and West Oakland in the Bay Area district, San Joaquin is South Central Fresno and Shafter. South Coast has the most districts in year 1. Muscoa, San Bernardino, East LA, Boyle Heights, and Wilmington, West Carson, Long Beach. San Diego, Barrio Logan, West National City, Logan Heights, Sherman Heights, and in Imperial, Calixto, El Centro, and Heber. So there are a lot of communities, a lot of districts, and each one of these communities has a large group of people involved in that process. So there's a lot of people represented by this map. And how do we all work together? It's quite complicated, and it's challenging in a fun way most of the time, I think. And so the communities, the districts, and CARB, us, are all working together. And the communities provide direction on the community concerns to the districts and CARB through a community steering committee that is organized by the local district. And the district is bearing a lot of the brunt of a lot of the work here, and they're working to design and implement the monitoring plans and the emission reduction programs within each one of these communities. And CARB, as a statewide agency, we're providing statewide strategies and as well as program requirements for all of the communities. And within that, we provide oversight, we offer technical support, and resources. We offer resources when available and where we can to help the local districts and communities reach their goals. And we're also administering the community air grants. I'll talk a little bit more about those in a few slides. So in our technical support, maybe I broke it. In the technical support aspect of this, we've developed, from a monitoring side, the 14 elements. And so these were produced as guidance to help produce more uniform monitoring plans and to ensure that monitoring plans really created something that would be useful for everybody at the end. And the 3 main questions that the 14 elements are trying to ask should make sense to most of us here, if not all of us, should be all of us. Why are we doing the monitoring? How will we do the monitoring? And how will the data be used to take action? And this last part is really important for the community air monitoring. And by action, what do I mean? It can be something as simple as informed personal choices. We've all talked about that. I've heard it many times this week. And it's like, should I go jogging this afternoon after work? Is the air quality bad or not? Evaluate source impacts, like source attribution. Where are the emissions coming from? Track progress of the emission reduction programs that have been adopted as part of 617. Or to support enforcement activities or new rules or regulations. And each one of these actions, they're quite different, and they require different data quality, they require different methods, different instruments or methods could be used to achieve these actions. And so dig a little deeper into the 14 elements. I won't spend too much time. We can really spend a whole hour just talking about the 14 elements, but there's A lot of more fun things to talk about. But what is the reason? So these are elements 1 through 5. And these we've broken out as kind of the initial items that you need to think about at the beginning of community air monitoring. And with 617, forming the community partnerships through a steering committee is very important. It's element 1. And then going through state the community-specific purpose. And this is more of a kind of a broad classification. So for example, community has noted that there's a lot of odors in a community. So they want to know where are the odors coming from. That could be an example of a very simple and straightforward purpose for air monitoring, is they want to know where the odors are coming from. The scope of actions, this would be, well, to get rid of the odor. That would be an action that you'd want to take if your purpose was to say, what is going on with the odor? And the air monitoring objectives, you dig in a little deeper into specifics, and you say, well, we're going to measure for VOCs, total VOCs to start with, because generally odors come from some volatile organic compound. So more specificity than what you have with the purpose. And then, as any monitoring plan, who's going to be doing what is very key to know at the beginning of the plan, so at the end, people don't change their mind about what they're trying to do. And in the middle, a few elements here. This is basically any monitoring plan will have. This is how we actually do the monitoring. So what are your data quality objectives? What are your monitoring methods and equipment? And these correspond to what your purpose and actions are. So the equipment you use will be dictated by what you're trying to achieve. Where will you monitor? What are your QA/QC procedures? How will you manage the data? And who will be doing the work? And so these are all very familiar to everyone in the room about monitoring. And the last few elements are to specify the process of when you're done monitoring. So in that 3 to 5 years, have you monitored and got the data you need to support the action that you wish to perform? And then, how do you communicate those results to the community and to the rest of the world? And these elements aren't necessary. They're not prescriptive. They're more provided for guidance for people in this room, communities, the district, to go with, so that at the end of this process, you will have a monitoring plan that will achieve what you want. And all of these are located in Appendix E of the blueprint, if you'd like to go in and read and learn more about each one of these elements. Okay, so on to the community air grant. So the next few slides, I'll talk about some of the things that CARB has done in support of AB 617 and community monitoring in general. So to support community air monitoring, the community air grants were awarded in May 2018, and this is for our year 1 grants. It was a total of $10 million through 28 total community groups and communities, and 22 of these grants have a monitoring component, which is significant. And the 2009 solicitation is currently online. I'm not sure of the deadlines for that, but the website is here if you'd like to learn more, share that with anyone that you'd like. And so these are, I think these are all the monitoring, or most of the monitoring grants that were awarded in 2018, some of the community organizations across the state. And so there's a lot of different groups with a lot of different objectives and a lot of different areas they're monitoring in, but there's a few general purposes that kind of cover all of them. And they are capacity building within communities. So this is just engaging the public and giving information on air quality and monitoring and all of that to bring everyone up, bring everyone's knowledge up. They're looking to fill in gaps in existing air monitoring. So maybe there's not a monitor any close to their house and close to their area or neighborhood, and they want to add one. Replace or upgrade older equipment. I know one of the grants is buying a T640 to replace an old EBAM. And some are expanding monitoring networks, adding more sensors to a network to broaden the monitoring area. And the general scopes of actions that these plans and grants are trying to achieve are information to the residents, businesses, or institutions around for activity. So school flag programs, can the kids go out for recess and things like that. Also to possibly inform future stationary monitoring or enforcement actions to create some data to bring to that discussion. And then the last two go back to the capacity building purpose through, to allow residents to become more involved in local air quality discussions through training, education, and just general increased awareness. CARB has also produced an online resource center that's on our community air protection website. And these are the three kind of big informational areas on there. The existing community air monitoring systems, we have an interactive map that we will add community air monitoring activity across the state so that you can click and kind of learn generally what's going on. And we just divided that into 4 broad regions of California: northern, central, southern, and the Bay Area. And we'll update that quarterly. So as new grants or AB 617 monitoring comes online, we'll add a brief summary and then links to any websites or information available there. We've also done a kind of high-level overview of measurement technologies. We tried to do this in kind of as layman terms as we can. It outlines things like, how do you measure particulate matter? What kind of technology is available for that? And then going a step further, what kind of measurement applications are there? Things like mobile monitoring, or what are low-cost sensors and stuff like that. And we provide links to information and manufacturers and other resources. For example, low-cost sensors, we provide links to AQSpec at South Coast. And CARB is also creating an online data portal called AQView. And this is being created by our colleagues at the Air Quality Planning and Science Division at CARB. And this is kind of a screenshot of what's going on. It's a repository for a lot of the community air monitoring data, is the short of that. And I've learned since I made this presentation a few weeks ago, the full system will not be live July 1st. There will be an iterative process where part of it comes online July 1st with full system sometime in the fall. So keep an eye out for that. And if you have detailed questions about that, I can forward you to the AQView team to talk more about that. Okay, so that was a high-level view, brief community air monitoring 617 overview. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the different tools and technologies. This is kind of a few of the big ones, a few of the big technology types that are being discussed and utilized for community air monitoring. And to start, the reference methods of the regional monitoring network. This community air monitoring isn't looking to, it'll never replace that. This is kind of the backbone for all of the measurements that will be done through community air monitoring. And in some cases, expanding this reference equipment actually is part of the community air monitoring. But it's not always possible for all groups and all situations due to the expertise it takes and resources it takes to run these instruments and the relatively high cost. So other tools and technologies are most likely or will be used. And to kind of go through some of these, one of the newer ones the last couple of years is air sensors. We've all heard a lot about them. We know, and I think there was at least 5 or 6 talks this week that was talking about low-cost sensors. And they have a lot of advantages in that they're lower cost, they're easier to deploy, a lot of them are plug and play, and you can have a wide network with huge temporal and spatial resolution. However, there are data quality concerns, and there's a lot of I'd say challenges associated with using low-cost sensor data to inform any direct decisions. But they do have a use. Mobile platforms, it's essentially putting instrumentation on a vehicle and driving it around the community. And this can be laboratory-grade instruments, it can be low-cost sensors. And the goal here is to really map out pollutant concentrations quickly and a screening type exercise across the community looking for elevated pollutants. And this data can then be used to place longer-term stationary sites and things like that. But there are a lot of analytical, say challenges, but there's a lot of analytical steps to take mobile monitoring data and have that be useful and defensible. Things like background calculations, and these emissions are just snapshots. You're driving by a location and you get 10 seconds worth of data. How many times do you have to go past that site before you have a really good understanding of how things vary over time? But for screening, it could be a valid option. Fence line monitoring in the Bay Area and South Coast, there's several regulations that are going into place, if not already. I forget the exact deadlines on that. But monitoring fugitive emissions or leaks or things like that from industrial sites. Usually it's an open path type application. Gives you 24-hour continuous measurements, but they are expensive equipment, and there's quite a lot of expertise required to maintain and operate these systems. Remote sensing has also been a discussion, both satellite-based and ground-based remote sensing. Satellite-based gives you total column concentration, things like PM and NO2, but again, you need a satellite for that. So either you have to launch your own satellite, or you have to pay someone to get the data for you, which creates a whole host of challenges. There's also ground-based remote sensing, things like on a mobile platforms where you can use things like, I think FluxSense is one of the ones where you're using ground-based remote sensing. There's also laser-based systems measuring individual vehicle plumes using remote sensing. So all these technologies are coming online, but they tend to require a high level of expertise. So community groups and people like that may not have the experience to operate some of these items. And last but not least, air toxics. So things like sample media, SUMA canisters, things like that. Also very useful, but generally provide 1-day averages or 8-hour averages. So the temporal resolution may not be adequate for the goals of a monitoring plan. And things like real-time GCs or things like that are coming available and providing hourly concentration of some air toxics and pesticides. So that was really brief. I didn't hit on everything. You could ask me questions and we could talk about each one of these for a long period of time. But just briefly, these are the broad technology types that we're seeing districts and community groups using in community air monitoring. But the key here is it doesn't matter what your tools and technologies are. They have to match what your monitoring objectives are for your community to make sure that it leads to some kind of action. Okay, so next few slides, I'll just talk a little bit about what we've heard from the districts and broad items. At South Coast, we've heard things about regulatory monitoring instruments, mobile platforms, remote sensing, low-cost sensor networks. So basically a smattering of what we just talked about in the last few slides. And that goes true with Imperial, San Diego, Sacramento, mobile, low-cost sensors, even using license plate readers to track vehicles within a community. Are mobile sources a big issue? Well, if you count the number of vehicles, that's a good way to start figuring that out. And then San Joaquin and the Bay Area are also doing mobile platforms, remote sensing, stationary sites and trailers. And so all of this is coming online in a few weeks to a few months. It will begin in a few weeks on July 1, as dictated by statute, and it will continue just to ramp up as resources and capacity continues to build. Okay, so now moving towards CARB specific. What kind of things are we doing? Some of these items were included in other presentations over the course of the week, but how do they relate to our overall community air monitoring? And so I'll start with SNAPS, which is the study of neighborhood air near petroleum sources. There's a lot of cool acronyms that I've heard this week, and so this is, I guess, our coolest so far. And so what it is we're monitoring the overall air quality in neighborhoods near oil and gas extraction activities. And the first two communities are Lost Hills and Baldwin Hills that have been selected. And Lost Hills is about 50 miles northeast of Bakersfield along I-5. And it's a small town. I think the town's about a mile square with 1,000 to 2,000 people living there. And they're about a quarter mile downwind of the Lost Hills oil field, which is the third largest oil extraction field in California. And what we're trying to do is provide information and context about the air quality in Lost Hills and Baldwin Hills following with as high temporal resolution as we can. And there hasn't been a long history of air quality measurements in Lost Hills, so this will be one of the first field campaigns in the area. And more information is available on the SNAPS website if you'd like to learn even more about that. So what kind of monitoring are we doing? There are two broad categories of monitoring going on, discrete and continuous. And in the continuous monitoring, we're looking at things black carbon, PM2.5, hydrogen sulfide, methane, CO2, CO, ozone, and species-shaded VOCs. And so these measurements are done on an hourly basis. And with the exception of the VOCs, this data will be provided hourly on a data website open to the public. So this gives information to the resident to have direct, or it's very fast knowledge about what the air quality is in their community, and I'll show that in a few minutes. And discrete samples are things that go back to the laboratories. We collect them in canisters and media, and they go back to the CARB lab, which we saw a presentation earlier about, and we also have a contract lab for the species that we don't have the capacity for. And there's glycols, sulfur-containing compounds, pHs, aldehydes, speciated VOCs, and then PM-bound metals. And it's not on here, but we just got it going. We have a real-time XRF to do hourly PM10 metal concentrations. And that will not be available online in real time. We haven't published that. It'll be available at the end of the study. And so that's what all the discrete samples will be. And this monitoring will last anywhere from 3 to 6 months. Probably in Lost Hills, it's our first site. We're still getting things going, so it'll probably be a little bit longer to get it all going. And this monitoring started a month ago, 3 weeks ago. So very new. And you can go online and look at the data if you'd like. So here's a picture of our SNAPS monitoring trailer. You can see all our inlets here at the top. And this was done during our kind of break-in period at our laboratory. So this is not in Lost Hills. This is in Sacramento, making sure everything worked before we drove down there. So you can see the list of instruments we're using for each one. And everything is hourly or faster. And for those faster, we're reporting a hourly average for that data. And the GCFID, Yun Liang gave a nice introduction to that earlier. It's basically a laboratory grade GC that we take down to the lab, or down to the field. And it will provide hourly concentrations for about 60 compounds. And for the discrete measurements, first here's a picture of the inside of the trailer. I think Yun Liang's picture earlier was a little prettier, but this is kind of the back side of it where you can see all the nuts and bolts. So there's our real-time GC, the gaseous rack, and then this is the particulate matter rack within the trailer. And this sampling is done for all of these 1 day in every 6. One day in every 6. And that all this data will be made available at the end of the study. And as part of this program, there's a lot of community outreach. So we'll give a presentation to the community that summarizes these results. And we'll update them, I believe, once during the study and then once at the end. And leading up to all this monitoring, we've had, I believe, 2 community workshops where we went and met with the community and took their input and tried to figure out what they were looking for in addition to what our goals were. We also have a mobile monitoring platform that we're using in Lost Hills, and it's equipped with a PQAO that measures CO2, CO, and methane, as well as 2 portable GCs looking at BTEX and total VOCs. We also have the capability to collect a grab sample as necessary. And so if we see high levels using our small portable GCs, we see spikes in VOCs, we'll take a grab sample and take that back to the lab to really see what's going on. And this can be used to measure upwind or downwind concentrations of our stationary site or to scout the community looking for the best place to site our stationary measurement. And kind of at the request of the community, we actually developed a website that shows the data in real time. And on this site, we calculate the AQI on an hourly basis, rolling 8-hour average of what's going on in the community of PM and ozone and display that here. But the community didn't really what does that mean? And that's this whole community aspect is, okay, our AQI is this. Well, is that good? Is that bad? I know it says it's red, but is it just here or is it the next town over? So on this website, we provide streaming data of the closest regional air monitoring station. So you can say, well, the San Joaquin Valley as a whole has a lot of PM today. It's not just Lost Hills. And so that's that context that a lot of people are looking for when they're looking at the data. Then we show real-time concentrations of all of those continuous measurements. And each one of them has an interactive map that updates every hour. And it shows you the last 7 days of hourly measurements. And so you can look back and zoom in and click and have fun with it. I know people here would like to do that. But if you go online, it's streaming right now, and you can see what the air quality is like there. And it's mobile friendly, so you can look at it on your phone. So that is, I believe that, yep. So that is our SNAPS program. And so moving on to another kind of example of what CARB is doing in the community realm is what we did with the Campfire last year. I believe it's been many presentation topics this week. So we're all aware of the magnitude of the Campfire. And this is a picture of Sacramento. So we're about over 100 miles south of where the Campfire was. And so on November 14th, that's when things get really bad in Sacramento. And this was the day before a CARB board meeting. And so our board expressed concern about how is this affecting the air quality inside of our building with the public coming into our building. Are we doing enough to protect them? And so we were tasked with trying to assess the indoor air quality impacts. And to kind of put some perspective on this, back in July, we began putting low-cost sensors at the 13th and T regulatory site. So we had several months of experience working with low-cost sensors with our regulatory instrumentation. And Koki gave a great talk about that yesterday. So if you want to take a look at that presentation whenever they go online, you can learn a whole lot about what we were doing there. But what that means is that we had a lot of data with the regulatory instrumentation and these low-cost sensors. So using that, we can create, sorry, I'm talking too loud and it's squeaking at me. Getting excited, I guess. So this is a plot showing the purple air concentration and BAMs. And so we had 9 purple airs co-located to the BAM on the roof during the Campfire and during other wildfire events. And what's unique about these situations is the concentration range that we get to operate at. So most of the time, if your PM's above 50, it's in Sacramento, that's a really bad day. And so your calibration range that you can work with is reasonably small. But with this, it really helps us in the wildfire realm where you see large concentration ranges. And so with these low-cost sensors, knowing how they perform over a wide range of concentration really helps you to understand the sensor performance. And I'm just showing purple hair here just for simplicity. We have other low-cost sensors. It's just we had more purple airs than any other ones at the time due to the speed at which our orders came in. So when the Campfire happened, we happened to have a whole lot of purple air. So that's why we're going with that here. And so what we found is that overall, the purple airs slopes about 1.63, so it overestimates the PM concentration relative to the BAM. And that holds true. I think I've seen a few. South Coast showed us a presentation yesterday where their purple air showed almost the exact same slope when compared to the BAM. So it's in different aerosol conditions. So that's interesting that it's very systematically high. But what that means is we can apply a calibration to correct for that and get more meaningful data out of it. And so we applied a physical model and some multilinear models using things like particle size distributions, assuming a density, temperature, humidity, things like that. And that was presented at the ASIC conference in October, if I believe. So more information on that is available. And Dave Ridley in our section has been one of the people behind this model. And what it does is it gives you a reasonable correction to what you see with the BAM. So now we have a reasonable understanding of how the purple air will respond to wildfire smoke. So coming back to our indoor air quality question, during the Campfire, how was our indoor air quality? So armed with that information, we placed purple airs in all of our buildings across CARB, across Sacramento. So here's a picture we have. We put some in hallways. This is an empty cubicle. We put a bunch of stuff there. We're just trying to see what it is because we had instrumentation on the roof outside. So we get a nice comparison between indoor and outdoor. And that's what's shown here in this plot. This is the PM2.5 concentration as a function of time. The purple line, it's kind of hard to see. Purple line is the purple air, and the black is the BAM. So this is the average of the 9 on the roof, 9 purple airs on the roof compared to the BAM during that time with our calibration applied. So you can see it traces reasonably well, periods where it's higher, periods where it's lower, but it reasonably estimates what's going on. And then the orange line at the bottom is our indoor purple air just downstairs from the roof. And you can see it's about 40% of what we had outside. And that held true over most of our buildings, except at our headquarters building. It's a LEED certified new building, very airtight, and it was significantly lower. Us at the monitoring lab division, our building is, I guess, a little leakier than it's an old building. But even with that said, right here, so kind of go to both sides here. Right here, and this evening, they replaced all of our filtration with upgraded filters on our HVAC system. And you can see the concentration drop precipitously, and then it didn't really trace what you saw outside little echo there. Didn't really trace what you saw outside as well. So the filters did help reduce the exposure inside. And so this is an example of how you can use low-cost sensors in a community type application where the purpose here was how bad is it inside? And so we did these measurements, and with low-cost sensors, we were able to approximate that exposure inside. And so bringing it a little bit more full circle, I actually stole this slide from Koki, so thank you, Koki. So this is on the 16th of November, so a few days later. And this is a map of Northern California with all of our regulatory networks. And you can see the swath of purple and maroon, kind of where the smoke was impacting the local population the most. And it does a really good job of mapping what's going on. And these are hourly data averages. So then if you add the purple air network right next to it, and this is the purple air network with our calibration applied, based because we know we have a good understanding of how it responds to wood smoke. Get that. So it expands the coverage. You see there's a lot more data points, and it generally follows the same spatial pattern that you see with the regulatory network. But again, we've talked about this, the data quality. You know, we don't know how these purple layers were deployed. Are they next to fireplaces, you know, or things like that. So the data quality is a little more uncertain than what we see with the regulatory network, but it provides minute-to-minute data relative to the average, or to the hourly data. And then if you go back, you can take satellite measurements, which provides, you know, a huge wide range of concentrations over the area, over the whole Northern California area, you know, in areas where there aren't any sensors at all. But these measurements, it's a daily snapshot. The measurements require modeling and are linked to ground-based measurements. So any one of these items, there are uncertainties associated with them, for better or for worse. But if you have more tools and technology, you can combine these and really help understand what's going on using new technology like satellites or low-cost sensors. And so moving forward, community air monitoring really is a paradigm shift in air quality. Focusing at that local level is challenging and difficult and presents all new problems. And it's going to be fun figuring them all out if we approach it that way. I think it can be a lot of fun. So adding that local scale to the existing regional monitoring network will help a lot of communities understand what's going on. And this is all just beginning. It's actually officially starting in a few weeks. Some districts and community groups have already started monitoring. They've already conducted some mobile monitoring. They've already put out some sensors, et cetera. And kind of to end things, coming back to that question at the beginning, how can we leverage new technologies to help community air monitoring? And the answer is there's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's going to take a bunch of different methods and a bunch of different approaches to do that. And it's really going to take the combination of these technologies and approaches and coordination between all of us, the community groups, everyone else at CARB, to actually make it happen. And with that, I will end and take any questions.
Now, since y'all developed the linear equation for adjusting the purple airs, is that something you're going to feel more confident in deploying into the communities on your side and collecting the data as reference to a BAM or in place of a BAM in some situations? Or is it still you'd want to go with more of the regulatory equipment and then just leave that to the public to do themselves?
It all depends. I think it's if we're looking for screening type or we're just trying to gather some information. For instance, there were some other air quals, the AQI sensors. We put them along a roadside up in Marysville last week, just to kind of get a feel for is there high PM there before we deploy anything, more labor intensive, more resource intensive. So using them as a screening application will be something that we will use, but we'll also make all this information available to the public so that people can use it as they see.
Yes, for the Snaps trailer, you said it's got a website, real time and everything. Do you have a way of turning it off? Because we'll be auditing it next week, so we don't want to freak the community out.
Yeah. No, it's a good question. If I go back, so if you look, see this little gap? Yeah, so we have a flag you can add, because we're using CARB logger as one to help in that. So we can add a flag to that and say, don't upload this. Yeah. So we will have the data, but yeah, we won't. Yeah. All of a sudden, yeah, they see the calibrations, but yeah, that would be bad.
Yeah, Jeremy, on the AQView, is that going to be an open platform that anybody can add data to?
Sorry.
I'm over here.
There you are. Thanks. There's a lot of people here.
Will anybody be able to add data to that AQView, or is that going to be closed just to certain communities? And then are you going to attempt to correct any of that data?
That I'm not 100% sure on. Is there anyone from, maybe, yeah?
Hi, yes. So for the initial launch of the system, it will just be collecting data from the 9 communities, and then we're also going to include data from the AIR grantees as well that are doing community monitoring. And then your question, what was the second half of your question again? I'm sorry.
Are you going to apply any corrections to that?
So again, for the initial launch, we are not going to correct the data, but in the future, we are going to allow like data providers to submit the raw data in addition to any corrections, and then we can also provide any equations that were used for those corrections for transparency purposes to the public.
Thanks.
I know that Purple Air have started allowing other algorithms on their website. I think Washington State or somebody like that is one of the selections.
Utah as well, I think,
Utah.
yeah.
Have you approached them, and are they open to using what you've found and making that available as one of the options?
I'm not sure if we've approached them directly, but I do know that we will make all of this available publicly. So that will be for sure, but I don't know if it will be incorporated into the Purple Air website. I can follow up with you if you, yeah.
So during the last fire season, we found with our Purple Airs that we had deployed that after a heavy event, they seemed to have gunk on them, for lack of a better word. And we found that the data were elevated for quite some time until that gunk finally fell away for whatever reason. Have you heard of any of these groups developing a light maintenance plan for them? We went out and finally sprayed all ours with canned air, and it seemed to help. But it seems like in these events, especially if folks are not going to the website until there's a fire, they have trouble.
Sure.
And maybe the solution is just canned air once a month. But
yeah, and maybe that's something we can, through our online resource center, we can add things like that, where if plans become available, we can point folks to that. So it's one of the goals with the resource center is basically anything that we can find, we'll put a link there and kind of act to kind of share anything that we know. Yeah. Yeah.
So I was just going to make a comment on the question about the algorithms on the Purple Air website. We welcome any input and algorithms that you might have worked on in your own analysis of the sensors. The point of that drop-down box with the conversion algorithms is to be able to add as many as we get submitted. So if you have specific functions that you want us to apply, please send them to us. The calculations can include particle counts, they can include CF equals 1, ATM values, temperature, humidity, all the different variables that we track can be used in that calculation. So if you have something experimental that you want to see on there, please send them to us. We'll incorporate it.
I just have a follow-up question about Purple Air. So if everyone submit the correction equations to the Purple Air, which one I should use for my Purple Air?
Out of the ones that are available?
Yes.
I think the question was which corrections you should use on your Purple Air. So it depends on the environment. The Salt Lake City one was done in Salt Lake City, and it was specific to the pollution that you experience in Salt Lake City. The smoke environment is a little bit different in that the average density of the particles is lower. So it depends on the type of pollutant. But the idea behind those conversion factors is that over time, we can get more experience with which one is applicable where, during which time of year, and maybe we can start applying them automatically to the data based on different rules. So right now, I think we're trying to collect as many of those as we can to try to understand it and do more studies around which one is applicable in which region. This is why we also provide access to all of them at any time. So you can look at the data using those different filters and see which one maybe matches your regulatory senses better, or which one matches your visual experience better. And feedback, we're trying to collect the information at this point.
Any more questions? Getting hungry?
Oh, one more. But yes, I'm getting hungry.
Can you talk about the quality assurance for the 617? Who's going to be responsible for it? Is it going to come from CARB or the agencies? Or?
Well, ultimately, the districts are responsible for the monitoring that they're doing as part of 617. So for that, it would be deferred to the districts for that. Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Jeremy.